He looked her in the eyes and said, "I don't shake hands with staff." What he didn't know? That staff was about to pull $2 billion from under his feet. Amara Daniels entered the glossy glass tower with quiet confidence. She didn't wear diamonds or designer brands, just a clean gray suit, low heels, and a gold pin on her lapel that only the sharpest eyes would recognize. She walked into the executive conference room, where billionaire Charles Grant was preparing to pitch for a $2 billion investment. Amara wasn't his assistant, and she wasn't there to take notes. She was the lead investment officer of one of the most powerful funding groups in the country, a quiet giant behind dozens of tech empires. As she extended her hand to greet Charles, he looked her up and down with a half-smile and said, "I don't shake hands with staff." Then he turned and greeted the white junior associate standing behind her. A few people in the room froze. Some looked down awkwardly, but Amara didn't flinch. She slowly withdrew her hand, nodded politely, and took her seat without a word. Inside, she wasn't angry. She was steady. She had seen this before. She knew how men like Charles measured power by appearance, by assumption, by skin. What he didn't realize was that he had just dismissed the very person who held the key to his deal. She watched him talk, watched him brag about projections and global reach, but none of it mattered now. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about how he treated people when he thought no one important was watching. Amara took out her tablet, opened the deal folder, and began her review, with one difference. She already knew the answer. Charles had shaken hands with everyone in the room, except the one person who could make his empire grow or disappear. Amara sat through the presentation with a composed expression, her face unreadable. Charles was in full performance mode, clicking through slides filled with bold numbers, colorful charts, and buzzwords that echoed across the boardroom. He spoke about market dominance, IPO timelines, international partnerships. His voice was loud. His ego was louder. But Amara wasn't impressed. She'd heard it all before. What she looked for in founders wasn't just data, it was depth, integrity, leadership, and all she saw in Charles was someone who couldn't see past a woman's skin or a name on a badge. She noticed how he ignored her every time she asked a question, how he directed answers to the men in the room, even when she was the one who had asked. Still, she stayed quiet, writing notes, observing not just what he said, but how he carried himself. She watched how he interrupted others, dismissed concerns, and bragged instead of listening. By the time the presentation ended, her notes weren't about revenue or product, they were about risk. Leadership risk, brand risk, human risk. When the room finally fell silent, Charles leaned back in his chair, smiling proudly, as if the deal was already done. But Amara simply closed her tablet and stood up. "Thank you for your time," she said calmly. Charles barely nodded, already turning to shake hands with someone else. And just like that, the meeting was over. No one in that room realized what had just happened. But Amara had made her decision, not out of emotion, but out of experience. She didn't need to raise her voice or prove her worth. She had seen enough. And in her world, quiet decisions often carried the loudest consequences. Back at her office, Amara walked into the boardroom where a few senior partners from the fund were waiting. She didn't bring slides or a presentation. She didn't need to. These people trusted her judgment. They always had. She sat down, folded her hands, and spoke clearly. "I've reviewed the pitch. The numbers are solid, but I'm recommending we walk away. It's not the business. It's the leadership." The room went quiet. No one questioned her. They knew Amara didn't make decisions lightly. She explained what she saw, not just arrogance, but a culture built on ego. A man who couldn't respect people unless they looked like him. A tone-deaf leadership style that would be a liability down the line. "If he couldn't recognize who I was in that room, what else is he blind to?" she asked. One by one, the partners nodded. The vote was unanimous. They would pull the deal. $2 billion, gone in a single meeting. Not out of revenge, but out of principle. The official notice went out that same afternoon. Funding declined. Opportunity closed. No further details. No need for drama. Charles didn't even know yet. While he was probably still celebrating, the floor beneath him had already begun to crack. Amara didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just returned to her desk, opened the next file, and kept going. Because this wasn't personal, it was business. But it was also a reminder. In the world Amara worked in, power didn't need to speak loudly. Sometimes it moved quietly, efficiently, with purpose. And by the time people noticed what had happened, it was already too late. Charles had walked past a handshake and lost everything it was holding. Charles didn't find out about the pulled investment until 3 days later. He was boarding a private jet when his assistant handed him the email. It was brief, no explanation, no follow-up, just one cold line. Funding declined. Terms withdrawn. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He called the fund directly, demanded answers, but no one picked up. His emails went unanswered. When he finally reached someone on the phone, all they said was, "The decision is final." That was it. Charles was stunned. The $2 billion deal he had already announced, already counted on, already used to charm future investors, was gone. Word traveled fast. Within days, other investors grew nervous. Competitors smelled weakness. Some insiders started whispering about what had really happened in that boardroom. People began connecting the dots about the woman he had ignored, the one he assumed was staff. Rumors spread that she had made the call, and suddenly, everyone remembered her name, Amara Daniels. The woman Charles hadn't thought twice about was now the center of every closed-door conversation. It wasn't just a PR disaster, it was a reputation shift. Big money players started pulling back from Charles's future ventures. Journalists started asking quiet questions. Former allies distanced themselves. For a man used to controlling every room he walked into, this silence was suffocating. And the worst part? He couldn't fight it. Because no one was publicly attacking him, he had done it to himself. Disrespect doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just echoes. And now, everywhere he turned, Charles could feel it. That moment he dismissed someone who held the keys. He thought she was just staff. But that moment at the handshake? That was the exact second his empire began to crack. Weeks later, Amara Daniels stepped onto the main stage at a global tech leadership summit. Cameras flashed, industry giants sat in the front row, and thousands of eyes turned to her. She wore the same calm expression she had during that infamous meeting. No bitterness, no ego, just presence. She spoke about leadership, investment ethics, and the power of values over valuation. No names were mentioned, but everyone in the room knew what had happened. In this industry, she said, people love to talk about disruption. But real disruption begins with how we treat each other, especially when we think no one is watching. The room was still. Every word landed like a pin drop. In the back, Charles sat silently, invited by the summit before the fallout. He didn't clap. Couldn't. He just watched the woman he once ignored command the stage he used to own. Amara didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her voice carried further than any handshake ever could. After the event, a group of young women, some in suits, some in hijabs, gathered around her. They didn't ask for autographs. They just said thank you. Because they saw in her what so many had been waiting to see for years. A woman who didn't just make space. She protected it. Amara later declined 3 TV interviews and went straight back to work. She didn't want fame. She wanted change. And quietly, she started building a new fund, one that would back leaders others might overlook. People of color, women, immigrants, dreamers. She knew the world wouldn't change overnight, but it had already begun. Because of one moment, one room, and one decision. When he refused to shake her hand, he thought she was beneath him. But Amara wasn't reaching for his approval. She was offering him a chance, one he never got back. The next morning, the branch opened its doors under new leadership. A fresh-faced interim manager greeted customers warmly, and the staff that remained carried themselves with a mix of relief and renewed purpose. The toxic energy that had once lingered in the air was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of productivity. Angela arrived shortly after opening, this time not as a customer, but as the official regional director overseeing multiple branches. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as every head in the room turned toward her. The few who had disrespected her days earlier were no longer there, replaced by professionals who valued every person who walked through the door. She approached the counter where she had been dismissed, running her hand along the smooth wood. The young teller behind the glass smiled nervously, unaware of the history in this spot. "Good morning, Miss Carter. How can I help you today?" Angela returned the smile. "Just here to make sure everything is running as it should," she said, her tone warm but firm. Customers nearby whispered her name, some recognizing her from the commotion earlier in the week. Before leaving, she addressed the staff, her voice carrying a message that was both a warning and an inspiration. Never underestimate the person standing in front of you. Kindness costs nothing, but arrogance can cost everything. As she stepped outside into the bright morning sun, she paused to watch the steady stream of customers entering the branch. The same building that had once shut its doors on her now operated under her command. With one last glance, Angela walked away, her head high, knowing she hadn't just changed a branch. She'd set an example for the entire company. The door closed behind her, but her impact was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now for more powerful and inspiring stories every week.